Going to do a little work on a Telecaster today. I've got an American-made Pro 2, which is, I think, on the higher end of their output these days. Maybe the Ultra series might be more expensive. Don't ask me. I can't keep the price info in my head anymore. I've got too many pop cultural references in there now. Not enough room. But this is a nice specimen. It's physically very light. I enjoy the color. It's maybe not your traditional ultra pure butterscotchy Telecaster color. Might be a bit more green in there than normal. Or maybe it's just the ash figuring is darker in this piece of timber. But whatever, I like it. It's got what they call a deep C neck profile, which some people like and others can't stand. I don't mind it at all. They've sculpted off the heel area here on the neck to prevent the terrible bruising your hand can take as you batter it repeatedly over and over and over and over again under the brutal tutelage of the Hardmaster Pai Mei. It's got the compensated brass saddles, so you can play in tune and also shame the guys who foolishly bought a vintage style. It's got these special pickups and this interesting bridge design where they cut down the height halfway on the side wings. A little easier on your hand. Also, they give you the option of doing traditional through stringing or top loading for people who desperately need to top load their strings. Don't know why. There's a treble bleed circuit in there so it doesn't lose brightness as you turn down the volume. And 22 frets. So you can replicate the almost there octave explosion at the end of AC/DC's TNT Dynamite. And the frets are just a little bit janky. I'm not the only one to notice this, but fretting quality control at Fender kind of went a bit haywire during the pandemic. This is made in 2021. In some ways that was to be expected, of course, but it's still disappointing to see. There were some really weird fret crowning decisions, work that can feel half done sometimes, or gritty textures on the fret tops. So when you bend, it's like rubbing the string against sandpaper. This is not as bad as some I've seen, but yeah, I mean, some of the fret profiles are a little bit flat, and I don't know, they've been dressed, but we'll see. And in this case, again, we have some fret sprout. It happens. Most new guitars will experience some measure of sprout during their first winter or two. If you live in an area where it gets cold, it's just going to happen. Action. About 5/64ths on the bass side. And about 4.5 on the treble. Of course, Fender usually measures these things up at the 17th fret. And, well, they don't change very much unless the neck is extremely out of alignment. 5 and 4.5 again. So, a little more than we'd like to see. Neck relief is about 8 thousandths, which is okay. Clearance over the first fret is around 21 thousandths, which is very good. Treble side, also about 21 thousandths. Could maybe come down a little bit on that side. Yeah. Just visually, the bridge pickup is much lower than I would expect. This has got flat pull pieces. It is 5/32 on the bass side and almost 1/8 of an inch on the treble, whereas the neck pickup 1/16 of an inch and less than 1/16 of an inch. So we might fool around with those. This is kind of interesting. The player purchased this on a trip to the US some time ago, and looking at this side, I mean, it's in practically brand new condition, but there is a touch-up which has been level sanded. I think there is still some witness lines around it. I first thought it was maybe under the finish, but it's not. This is a dab of a very different color. I wonder what that's about. Got the sort of yellowy orange lacquer on the ends of the frets now, which is kind of standard for Fender these days. Of course, they've always sprayed the necks after the frets have been installed, but usually when a neck has turned this dark. The lacquer on the fret ends is long gone and been worn off by thumbs or palms. But that will unfortunately go away as we dress these down again. I don't think we'll miss that. I think the action might be a little on the high side to cover up the need for some spot fret dressing here and there. That is the 5th fret. And here's the 3rd fret. At a certain point we have to ask if the 3rd and 5th frets are rocking. Are they high? Or is it that the 4th fret is low? That can be important in some situations, in others not so much. To ascertain that, I'll take a straight edge that's longer and sight against a light background and check out the situation and see what's actually going on. In this case, those frets are indeed high. Next thing to ask yourself is, are they loose in their slots and perhaps popping up? And, you know, I get in there close with my magnifier and look with a piece of dowel, which I press on there firmly to see if there's actually any kind of up and down motion. And no, they seem in their slots. They're solid. How does that happen? Given that these would have been dressed with something straight, or maybe even put on a Plek machine, which is like a CNC mill. Sometimes it's just the vagaries of the wood and or the way they were seated in place. You know, usually this is done with something like an arbor press, and if you're a little heavy-handed, sometimes you'll push too far into the wood. The fret will be depressed slightly, and over time it'll kind of, the wood will unwind, as it were, and push it back up. You know, in this case it's a simple sort of thing, and I'm going to use an understring fret dresser. This allows me to dress the frets while the guitar is under string tension and the neck is in the orientation it'll be when it's being played, kind of. For the fret ends, I started off by dressing using my file that's held at an angle in a special block, which just gets rid of the bulk of the material. I have to sight down between the file and the edge of the board to make sure that I'm not going to be, you know, plowing into the lacquer and removing that. That would be annoying. I'll knock off those nasty little sharp corners. And recrown the ones that require recrowning. Have to make sure to polish the ends as well. And everything gets a polish, and a polish, and a polish. Lastly, there are these tiny little spurs down at the bottom of the tang, which have to be knocked off and brought flush, and I have a tiny little file to do that with. Just down there at the very corner. With the frets cleaned up, I can now lower the action. Let's do some pickup height adjustment, shall we? Now you can go online and actually look them up on Fender's website. They will give you specs for this kind of thing, depending on your model. But in general, if you've got sort of an American standard Telecaster, you're going to be looking around 3/32, 5/64 on the bass side, and about a 1/16 of an inch on the treble, which would be about 1.5 millimeters. And probably 95% of the population would be happy with that. In general, the closer you get the pickups to the strings, the more bright and present it is. There is a point though, especially with single coil pickups like this that have the magnets as slugs, as the pole pieces, where if you get it too close you'll end up impeding the vibration of the string through the magnetic pull of the magnet, and you'll end up with a weird warbling tone. The neck pickup, you can use the same measurements. Sometimes it's nice to have it a little bit lower, especially if you're going for something like a lead boost kind of thing. If you use your bridge pickup for the solo part of your performance. It's nice that this model allows you to adjust the pickup height without removing the pick guard. Sometimes the screws are hidden. The real test is in the ear, of course. It's pretty balanced. Right, we'll finish up the 00 conversion like I said I would. Oh, you didn't realize? Were you one of the several thousand who didn't get to see part 2 because I had the temerity to upload it on a Wednesday? The algorithm punishes hard for any deviation from the pattern. But yeah, I need to put some weathering and wear on this guitar. That's a delicate subject, isn't it? People hate Relicing. Or they love it. Or they're indifferent until pressed on the matter. Pre-war guitars, the company, not the guitar, showed up on the market a few years ago with their first release of their Relic flat top acoustics, which until that point acoustic guitars seemed kind of safe from the attention of the spiked mallet brigade. I thought at the time, seeing their ad, like, oh, here we go, because I think most of us recognize that you can take it too far, right? And on a brand new guitar, does it even make sense? Those of us in the business of repairing stuff occasionally face the need to make our work blend in with what's pre-existing on the instrument. And in this case, well, the owner wants it. And to be honest, the rest of this guitar has quite a bit of wear and history on it. Lots of scratches, bumps, and dings from 90 years of being around. And though I'm pretty pleased with the appearance as it stands, I think it might be fitting to age it up. It could use it. And this is not an activity to be entered lightly, because it is possible to go wrong. I've seen some artificially aged stuff. Well, think about furniture, really, that involves someone hitting it with a mallet and a chain, producing the exact same indentations all over the surface in a very regular way, and that just feels wrong to look at. It's like, sir, you are lying to me and you're not good at it, right? So I think it behooves us to examine old guitars and lots of examples. I've seen enough up close now to have a general impression of what happens and the normal locations for wear. I asked David at Scale Model Guitars if I could use one of his photos of Jake Eddy's recent acquisition, which is a 1938 D18 that he'd had in for some work, because it really shows what prolonged play wear amounts to. The mixture of marks, some of them are very old and they've darkened considerably, and there's fresh scratches on top. There's an overall patina of scratches that are very random. They act sort of like a base, and then there's the localized areas of pick wear. I think the most difficult thing is pick wear doesn't look like a sanded surface. If anything, it's more like sand blasted, because there's this uneven effect. The soft portions of the growth rings are abraded deeper, and the hard growth lines stand proud of that. That means you can't just sit there with a sandpaper block and sand off the lacquer and call it done. It's also important to note areas without wear. Check out the treble side of the soundboard that's tucked up against the fingerboard extension. That's usually one of the most pristine areas because it's in the rain shadow. The pick strokes just don't end up there. Before I take the strings off, I'm going to make some lines of demarcation about where a pick would stop. Okay, I'm going to start with that overall patina. Little dents and scratches. And I'm going to use a number of different tools to do this, and being cognizant of where it happens usually. Oftentimes you'll see it in kind of a band around the lower bout here in the end block. And it gets a little bit lighter as it gets towards the bridge. She's just a natural kind of protective measure here, which accepts a lot of the blows if this thing was going to be laid up against something. This would also be the best place on the guitar if you ever wanted to have a signature put on there, which I do not suggest. And don't ask your repairman to spray over it to try and preserve it. But this seems to be the area where there's usually the least amount of wear or damage. So, dents and scratches. I'm using the rounded tip of the back end of a paintbrush here. And just gonna, this is light, you know, this isn't huge stabbing motions or anything. This is just, it touches. And you got to be really mindful because it's too easy to fall into a pattern. So before you touch down, you kind of like, is this where it should be or not? And I'm going to switch up paintbrushes to one with a smaller end. Get some more. Little light scuffs, you know, to the point where it's almost not showing. Lots of tiny little scratches here and there, made with various implements. The black paint on this handle, small amounts of it get deposited in the surface, which is kind of nice. This is a bar of touch-up wax, which is a fill stick that can be used to simulate the dirt that falls into these things and ends up trapped down in the bottom. Throws them into a bit more relief. Makes them more evident. Comes in a number of different colors. What happens when the lacquer film is broken and the wood underneath is exposed is it starts to oxidize and darken and turns into a muddy gray color. So if you look at old guitars that have old damage, you'll notice that it's usually pretty close to black. Now, I'm going to move on to the sound hole, and we're going to simulate years and years of pick wear. I'm going to use some sandpaper, but this is 1200 grit. Very fine sandpaper. It has less of a tendency to wear through the hard growth lines. I'm using a little angled chisel to scrape down between the growth lines and get rid of most of the extra lacquer before I start sanding. Also buff around in various areas with a Scotch-Brite pad, trying to thin the surface slightly. We've gone a little water here to raise the grain. What I'm going to do is gray it down using a mixture of India ink and water. And I'm going to do this in successive passes. I'm going to build up to a color. And this is going to age that wood and make it look a little more satisfying. Another thing that can be used is a solution of potassium permanganate in water. This is kind of poisonous, so don't drink it. This is an oxidizer, and it's like adding 80 years of age in 5 minutes. So use a fairly dilute solution and again build up to the tone I'm looking for. Here's where it gets truly barbaric. The pick, or plectrum, is the perfect implement for this. Nothing else works the same. It's soft enough that it doesn't cut the wood, but it compresses the summer growth lines down below the surface of the late growth, giving you that washboardy effect. And it requires a lot of pick strokes in various directions. 1 or 2 look terrible, but if you get 15,000 on there, it's a patina. Okay, I've got some wear on there. I'm not entirely happy. I'm going to have to go back and touch this up in various areas and give it a few more treatments, I think. But that's where I'm going to stop for right now because I'm tired and I need to go to bed. Anyway, we'll see you guys next week.